G'day, this is Adam Ford, and I'm interviewing Randal Koene for the H Plus conference in Hong Kong in December this year. Randal Koene is a Dutch neuroscientist and neuroengineer and co-founder of carboncopies.org, the outreach and road mapping organisation for advanced substrate independent minds. Randal, would you like to explain more about yourself?
Hi, Randal Koene here. I'm glad to talk to you today, and so I'm talking to you from Halcyon Molecular. That's in Redwood City, California, Silicon Valley, actually. It's a company that does DNA sequencing primarily, though my background is computational neuroscience, and my interest specifically is substrate-independent minds. The idea, how do you take the circuitry that we have inside a biological brain and put it into any other substrate that can do the same kind of computations. A well-known, or at least a more well-known term for the process, or for one way of doing that kind of implementation, is whole brain emulation. That's the idea that instead of coming up with some abstract method of doing the functions in the mind, you would take the actual neuroanatomy and neurophysiology of the brain and try to emulate that as closely as possible. And that's something that I've been working with a number of colleagues on for quite a while. Maybe we'll get into that later in the interview. I just wanted to put that term out there because this is something that's actually been snapped up by several people in the larger neuroscience community lately, as there's been more interest in brain emulation, sort of an offshoot of the popularity of connectome research these days. So yeah, let's get started.
So, what can you describe briefly what you'll be talking about at the conference in Hong Kong?
Sure. So I hope to address two topics specifically. One of them is I'd actually like to talk about the impossibility of achieving successful life extension or life expansion, if you like, without being able to access and improve our minds. And I say that because there's simply no way for an unmodified 200-year-old, let's just imagine a 200-year-old person, to be able to deal with, contribute to, and enjoy society in the way that a nimble teenager would. So what I'm saying is, even if you imagine a person who's 200 years old and doesn't have Alzheimer's disease or anything of that nature, still they would have, their mind is shaped by their experiences when they were young, which means that they have a very different way of filtering the world and seeing things that are happening around them than a young person would, who is suddenly confronted with the entire new world that they don't know about and where they can learn it from any angle. There's a difference there that we need to understand, and if we're going to live longer and live better, then we need to also know how to make our minds able to deal with that. So that requires more than just living longer. And that's something I think is often not really looked at or underplayed in the transhumanist community or among people who are looking into life extension. The second topic that I think is important is to talk about the wonderful new set of research projects that are going on around the world right now. I was just alluding to that in the introduction, namely the exploration of the connectome. So all of the connections in the brain, in a specific brain, which neurons are connected to which other neurons, and what are they doing, and looking at that from a structural and from a functional point of view. These projects are poised to provide exactly the kind of information that's needed for a whole brain emulation. So that's the second topic I want to talk about.
Gotcha. So what would people be able to take away from this, and if there was any message that people would be able to take away or from these talks, what do you think it would be? What would people learn?
Well, I would like them to think a bit about the relevance of neuroscience research and neural engineering, brain-computer interfaces, whole brain emulation, and eventual substrate-independent minds being something that's relevant to all of the advances that are going on in our society, as well as in technology, which are going on around us all simultaneously. None of this is happening in a vacuum. So developing AI on one hand, developing life extension technologies on the other, these are all happening together concurrently. And us in society, within all this change, we have to be able to change along with this. That's why I alluded to this person who's 200 years old, and how do you still, feel that you're part of the society, contributing something to it. I want people to understand that substrate independent minds, so this project, is not just a crucial project for the long-term future, which some might think, okay, let's achieve biological life extension first, and maybe someday in the future we'll achieve substrate-independent minds. It is, in fact, something that we need to be working on right now. And that's not just because our brains weren't built to cope with 200 years of societal change. That's one thing that's important. It's also because we're on the cusp of a lot of changes that require greater flexibility than what our genes were evolved to handle, because they were evolved to handle our present environment. And that doesn't mean necessarily that who we are biologically, what we're capable of, and how we can think is enough to deal with other challenges that are coming up. So, for instance, just to give an example, at the dawn of new intelligence, such as, for example, artificial intelligence, and new challenges that come along, rapidly changing circumstances and environments, and perhaps space travel, etc., we need the kind of access to the fundamentals upon which our beings depend, which is really what's going on inside our minds, where we live most of the time, what we process, so that we can also benefit from the progress that's going on around us. We're not just bystanders. So just if you imagine, we may be able to afford being an intelligent executive among unintelligent machines, such as we are right now, that extend our senses by being able to put cameras somewhere or use microscopes, or that extend our actions. But it's a whole different thing. We can't really afford to be the less intelligent bystander as another more intelligent sentient being takes over the reins, for example, just to give one example of a new challenge. There's simply no way that, if that happens, to be the most successful species and to maximize the likelihood of being able to pursue our dreams if we're not competitive. And I mean competitive not just among one another, just to compete with other people, but to compete with everything that's going on around us, everything we're developing. No science develops in a vacuum. And so I think advances in biology and in technology really go hand in hand with advances in neuroscience. And it's these new tools that I want to talk about at the conference that make whole brain emulation possible, and they're being developed right now.
Well, yes, they certainly are. Well, I just saw on the news just recently. This guy Mintz, what's his first name? Anyway, I thought a new scientist, and actually at the SENS conference, they have been able to develop a cerebellum. They're saying that they've developed a digital cerebellum that rats can use, and they can. It's quite amazing.
Are you sure it's a cerebellum?
Yep. It says it's proof of concept that we can record information from the brain, analyze it in a way similar to the biological network, and return it to the brain.
Who did you say that was? Because I only know one person who was working on something like this. His name is Ted Berger.
Okay.
From USC. So okay, and he was working on CA3.
This is hot off the news, okay?
Oh, okay.
So, yeah,
artificial
great.
cerebellum.
Yeah, I know, and that just goes to show there's stuff happening everywhere. An artificial cerebellum. Yeah, amazing, hey? Alright, no worries, well that's great. I'll look forward to seeing your talk at the conference this year. I think it will be quite interesting. I'll look forward, and this is going to be on the 3rd and 4th of December in Hong Kong, 2011. Okay, cheers. No worries.
Great. Thank you.